In a new episode released by Tucker on Twitter, what we see is hyperinflation and reckless monetary policy could soon devastate the global economy. We travel to Argentina where it's already happened. This episode is fantastic, and this is one of the biggest things to happen for libertarians and libertarianism, since I would argue whether it's the appearances of Dave Smith on Joe Rogan to spread the fundamentals and the ideals, or the Mises Caucus takeover, this is so much larger than both of those because Tucker Carlson has a much wider and more disparate audience than someone like Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan being the biggest podcaster, but Tucker Carlson being the biggest figure in news throughout all of human history, bigger than Walter Cronkite. It's unbelievable how popular this man is. He lives in both fame and infamy in many people's minds. And with that comes the fact that there will be more people looking at the fundamentals and ideals of libertarianism because they're being presented by Tucker Carlson. I cannot wait for him to have this conversation with Javier Milei. Him going to Argentina was a genuine stroke of genius to have this conversation with him, as well as to look at the fact of what happens when people suffer under the nature of hyperinflation to their currency. Let's go ahead and jump into this interview. Let's go. Tucker Carlson with a fantastic new episode covering what's going on in Argentina. Let's go ahead and get into it. Take it away, Mr. Carlson.
For politicians, money is power. They always crave more. But because they don't actually produce anything, they've got limited ways to get it. They can hike taxes on the population and collect the cash at gunpoint. That's the most straightforward way. But it's also highly unpopular. Voters don't like paying higher taxes. They resent it. So over time, most politicians in most places decide it's a lot easier to devalue the currency. You keep the tax rate pretty much the same, you just print more money. At first, most people don't even notice that it's happening. The money seems free. This is how the US government just paid for the COVID checks and the war in Ukraine and pretty much everything else that Washington has done for the past couple of decades. Just churn out more dollars. You can see why it's a popular strategy. But what happens if you keep doing it year after year? We really ought to know. So to find out, we flew to Argentina, a country of 45 million people on the Atlantic coast of South America. 100 years ago, Argentina was one of the richest places in the world. It had everything: abundant natural resources, vast open spaces, a well-educated, capable European population. Its capital, Buenos Aires, once looked like Paris, but probably richer. You can still see remnants of that time as you walk around the city today, but the buildings are ratty now and marred by graffiti. Argentina is no longer a rich country. It's one of the poorest nations in the Western Hemisphere. Nearly half the population here lives below the poverty line. Chicken for dinner is a luxury. The people are still impressive. The natural resources still exist. But Argentina's leaders have destroyed the country by devaluing its national currency. Argentina now has Weimar-like hyperinflation.
Okay, let's go ahead and touch on the fact that, one, this is the most libertarian I've ever heard Tucker sound. This is quite fascinating. I love the fact that he's referring to the people in government as nothing more than useless parasites that are siphoning the value of your dollar away, because it's spot on. They absolutely are. These people are criminals of the parasitic class that do not create value with their labor. They steal it from you and then decide how they should spend the value that you've put out on whatever subsidies and programs they decide that they should fund. Okay, so on to the Weimar-like hyperinflation. He's referencing what happened to Germany after World War I and before World War II. So during the time of the Weimar collapse in Germany, they were hit with extreme hyperinflation, and this is because they had to print so much money to pay off the debt from all the destruction they'd done to the surrounding countries during World War I. After this, what happened was the currency's value plummeted because they printed so much of it, effectively leading to the hyperinflammatory state that what we saw was leading people to go pull out mass sums of money from the bank to pull out tiny bits of value. And this is what led to people bringing wheelbarrows to the banks in Germany, because they were bringing wheelbarrows to hold the money that they could take out because it was so much volume but so little value. But nonetheless, they still had to extract it from the system itself, being the fact that we were less technologically involved. We had no capacity to actually orient ourselves around an understanding of having a digital transaction system. So you had to go ahead and get the physical fiat currency. And with that came the wheelbarrows. And with the wheelbarrows came the fact that you had to hold so much currency that it clearly had so little value that when the German winters came, people finally decided that the money had so little value that they would burn it rather than using it to purchase goods, because it was more valuable to use as fuel to burn fires to heat your homes than it would be to sustain yourself by purchasing goods because of how little value it actually had. This is what happens with the nature of a fiat currency and a government spending that is completely out of control. Let's go ahead and get back to it.
It takes a brick of bills to buy lunch. Roads and bridges fall apart and nobody can afford to fix them. Things unravel.
We spend more money as a country than we earn money.
This man is called Hernan. He's been trying to run a restaurant in one of the richest neighborhoods in Buenos Aires.
It's really very hard to work in Argentina, to live in Argentina. We are tired. I think that's one of the main feelings of the people. No, people are tired of all of the politicians saying the same things a couple of years and nobody does nothing good.
Over the course of the average month, the Argentine peso loses 10% of its value. In other words, everybody gets 10% poorer every month of the year.
Okay, that is unbelievably depressing. Let's consider the fact that, let's say you're an American and you make $60,000 a year, and you have 2 children, a wife, a home, you're paying off a car or two, and you're struggling, but you're able to make your payments. And then the 2008-2009 financial collapse hits, and you lose 30 to 40% of your value. Because you're not someone who holds assets, you're holding money in things like your 401k, you're holding money in things like the stock market, but very little bits in the stock market. What you really do is you have this money in savings. And the thing is, if you are not part of the asset class when these major financial crises hit, you're usually the people who end up holding the bag. And what we saw was in the 2008-2009 financial crash, people losing 30 to 40% of their value. Well, if you're that family that I just mentioned and you're somewhat making it by, but you're okay, if you lose 30 to 40% of your value, you're underwater. You're struggling to get air. And if you're someone who's making $30,000 to $40,000 a year, and let's say you have 2 kids and you're trying to pay off a car and you're trying to pay off for your home or your apartment that you're renting, leasing, or trying to buy, well, what do we see? You're not just underwater, but you're completely drowning. And this is what happened to the United States. This is what happened to so many people during the 2008 financial collapse. And this is what happens when you have a hyper-regulatory state, because the industry is regulated to the nth degree and there's no capacity to actually orient yourself out of the collapse. Because what we saw was we didn't take care of the actual people that needed it from the suffering. What we did was we bought out the bankers, and we, with the process of buying out the big banks, is what led to a major populist revolt within the United States, which is what pushed the whole process of Occupy Wall Street, which is what pushed the Tea Party movement, which is what correlated and ended up to this understanding that the banks were the issues. And then what happened was the banks ended up pushing top-down propaganda, buying off the left effectively. And now what we see is the left, once being the people who were saying, we know you're the problem, it's us, the 99% versus the 1%, the people who don't own banks versus the people who own banks, they're now going through the Pride Parade, waving Bank of America flags, holding Chase signs, and waving Lockheed Martin banners. Like, are you kidding me? It's so obvious what happened. They clearly bought off the left through the process of subversive politics, and then they demonized the right so that they could create a culture war, because when you're failing on politics and when you're failing on policy, what you do is you pivot to a culture war. Let's go ahead and get back to this.
It doesn't take long for people to go hungry.
Our institutions have something wrong.
Diana Maldino is an economist and a candidate for the Argentine Congress.
Basically, the problem we have right now, we are 47 million people, out of which only 11 million people have what you would call a job. Slightly under 3.5 million people work for government, and 7 million people work in the private sector.
Okay, so what they're saying is 3.5 million people out of the 11 million people that work in Argentina are useless, that do nothing, that create no value in the economy, except siphon value away from the people who actually create it with their labor. And then with that comes an ever more dwindling value to their economy, because it's only going to spiral down wherever further, because you have 3.5 million of the 11 million people in your economy that are operating, supposed to be working, creating literally zero value. And then you have the other 7.5 million people propping up the rest of the country.
So 10 million people, 11 million people out of 47. 25% of the people.
And that's counting the government workers. So if you take out the government workers, and that really is an electric window.
Yeah, 1/7 of the country would have a private job.
So that means 7 million people are working to support the other 40 million people.
And let me add something. 60% of the children are poor. So if you ask me, if 60% of the children are poor, the whole country is poor.
Argentina's currency is so inflated and worthless, it can no longer be used to buy anything of value. Cars, houses, even bicycles are priced in US dollars. The problem is the government lies about this. banks are not allowed to exchange dollars at market rates, and that drives the entire population underground to the black market. So we're in downtown Buenos Aires. It's a Friday afternoon, and we're on our way to a cueva, a cave, to change US dollars into pesos. Now, the caves are the only place in the country that gives the actual exchange rate. The government lies about what its currency is worth and gives about half its value to people in exchange for dollars.
So he's going to continue on and explain his point, but I want to make a point and say, so how evil is that? The fact that the government, again, the parasitic, useless, thieving class that is government entities and people that work in government, they are sitting there lying to you about the value of your dollar, even though it's already so worthless that you can't do anything of value with it. But what they're going to do is they're going to tell you it's only worth half of that. This is how little the people in government care about the people they're supposed to work for.
This is kind of the last outpost of economic honesty in the country, and of course the government is trying to shut them down. So we're going to see if we can exchange 100 US dollars for Argentine pesos.
Okay, so I was going to pause because I wanted to make a comment. It says, this is the only place that can be trusted within the entirety of not the United States, the entirety of Argentina's financial system to actually give you a proper exchange rate. What's that? An open market system that's unregulated, removed from government top-down restrictions and control, is actually something that can be trusted when it comes to distributing my facets of everything I want to orient myself around, whether it be myself in the private market gathering specific items, whether it be the jobs I want to acquire, whether it be the training I need to get. It turns out the fact that top-down regulatory structures are nothing more than a burden on all of the systems that we operate under.
Hola! He's my friend Tucker.
Oh,
Margo.
hola. Is there security here?
Yes.
This is so cool. Well, we're on the top floor of a building, unmarked. We just got buzzed in after waiting outside for a while, and trying to change a $100 bill.
Okay. How many money do you expect are you going to receive?
I don't know.
More or less. Guess.
Enough to keep my door from closing, a doorstop. Well, now I feel rich.
This is like Mad Max of caves. Don't seem like that?
That is, so how much is that worth?
Okay, so there's roughly 10 stacks there. If that's the case, and this is just exchanged for $100, each of those stacks is only worth $10. That's unbelievable. Now imagine you're simply trying to go purchase something that would be roughly, I don't know, 50 USD. The fact is, every single store would have to have a money counter on hand because they wouldn't be able to go through and count all of this currency every single time for every single transaction.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Amazing. How do you carry all this? Hold on.
In a bag.
In a bag. You know, it's obviously amusing, but it's also sad. Imagine if that was your country, this was your national currency, and it was like, it had the value of home insulation, you know? And this was your work product. This is what you spent all day working for, and this is what you hope to feed your family with and send your kids to school and buy clothes. I mean, and it had been rendered worthless by greedy, dishonest pigs running your government and lecturing you about transgenderism, but in the end you were left impoverished and they were left rich. I mean, that's theft. It wasn't some sort of, savage situation in there. It looked like a bank almost, though it's illegal, and it was, had a kind of sotto voce vibe. It was very orderly. But imagine if your life entailed going 4 times to a, quote, cave just to get the actual exchange rate on your money that you made by working. It's, again, they're stealing.
It's unbelievable.
And they're lying, and they're enforcing that lie at gunpoint. They close those places down because they're this little window into reality that the government can't tolerate. That's
Okay, Tucker is so spot on with this. They're stealing, they're lying, and they're willing to shut every single operation down outside of the purview of the state because it proves their malfeasancy and it proves how useless they actually are.
That the government can't tolerate. That's what a collapsing society looks like. Everybody's moving backwards. Nobody can tell the truth about anything. The functions of ordinary life have to be conducted furtively, in caves. In Argentina, the incentives are now so perversely inverted that many people decide it's not worth working. They can make more money sitting home idle.
Sometimes we don't work because it's cheaper not to work than to work.
Why is it cheaper not to work?
Because you have to pay a lot of taxes to the people, and the unions and that sort of things that are very, very expensive. So so sometimes we prefer not to work.
The tax burden in this country is so high that the people who are sitting there that actually do decide to work sometimes choose not to, because the degree of theft that is happening to them, the amount of money that is being stolen from them by the unions and by government regulation, by government taxes, and by all the other facets of the economy that they are taxed at every single nook and cranny, much like how we are here, it turns out that it's simply just cheaper not to work. That is tragic, and this is the sign of a society in decline. And this is why I would argue Argentina needs Javier Milei.
Oh, that's really incredible.
Is that common here?
Yes, it's common.
For young people in a country like this, the obvious solution is to leave, and millions have. The future of the country slipping away forever. What's remarkable is that's just fine with the current Argentine government and with the Western media and NGOs that prop it up and relentlessly defend it. They're happy with the corrupt status quo. They're thriving. So they attack anyone who challenges the way things are currently done. Not surprisingly, they especially hate Javier Milei.
Creo que
A ver, estamos los que laburamos, sí,
Es
que
cierto,
generamos
es
riqueza.
cierto.
Yo no te vi
Están los
laburar
parásitos
nunca.
como eso.
Yo no te vi laburar nunca.
Sí, bueno,
a vos no
justo.
te vi laburar
Bueno,
nunca.
está
Lo
bien,
único que
te
te veo
ves
es acá.
te ves
A vos
seguro
no te
que
vi
cuento cómo
laburar
se genera
nunca.
riqueza.
So, the politician's saying, I never see you working. I never see you working. And Javier Milei, absolutely love this rhetoric from him. He truly sounds like a diehard libertarian, like an ANCAP. He says, what do? You're nothing more than a parasite. You sit there and you siphon value away from the worker and you steal from them. And this guy says, oh, well, I never see you working. It's like, yeah, because I'm never walking the halls of Congress, because I'm never someone who's sitting there that's trying to operate as nothing more than a bureaucrat that is a parasite on the people.
Parásito.
Tranquilo.
Parasite.
Somos estéticamente superiores. Sí, digamos, ¿cómo eran los edificios de los zurdos? Cuadrados, negros, oscuros, sin ventanas, eran inmundos. Teníamos las Torres Gemelas hasta que un hijo de puta las tiró abajo. Tenemos el Guggenheim. Es una maravilla. Inventamos la minifalda y la bikini. ¿Saben qué? Yo he decidido. Vamos con el capitalismo. ¡Viva la libertad, carajo!
A ver, yo creo que el gran problema argentino es un problema cultural.
Man, and the fact is, he's so spot on, and he understands something huge, that it's not just Argentina. The greatest Argentine problem is cultural. Just like the greatest problem in the United States is cultural. Many people within the US have lost their revolutionary spirit, and with that comes the degradation of the culture that the US once held in such high regard.
Es decir, esta es una sociedad que está infectada de socialismo. Los políticos son una suerte de sociópatas que quieren hacernos creer que nosotros somos inválidos mentales, inválidos en todo sentido, porque no podemos vivir si no fuera por ellos. En realidad, los que no pueden vivir sin nosotros son ellos.
Milei is an economist who's running for president here in the election next month, and the polls show he's winning. Milei's main observation is that things in Argentina are not working. Socialist monetary policy hasn't made people happy and secure. It's wrecked pretty much everything. It's destroyed the economy and families and the national spirit. It's enriched just a few. That's hardly a radical interpretation of events. It's obviously true, and everybody knows that it's true. But for daring to notice it, the stooges at Jeff Bezos' Washington Post and many other Western media outlets have denounced Javier Milei with rising hysteria as some kind of crypto-Nazi. Thankfully for Milei, the working-class young people who support him don't read the Washington Post. We sat down with Javier Milei for a long and interesting conversation, which will air here tomorrow in this space.
I'm so excited.
Keep in mind as you watch it that it's not just about Argentina. It's about you and your future too.
Phenomenal episode from Tucker. I love him doing these investigative journal style pieces where he's going in to actually see the process that the Argentinian people have to suffer when it comes to the hyperinflation of their currency. It gives him a better understanding of the grounding of what will happen to the United States in the future, as well as other countries that are hyper-regulated into the dirt by the state. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into some clips I have from Javier Milei. I love this guy. I wasn't sure how I felt about him at first, and then I listened to him speak, and when I say listen to him speak, I listened to his speech and read the transcript because I cannot speak Spanish, and my God, I was sold so quick. I wasn't sure how I felt at first because he looked like the Fonz, and I was like, okay, this guy's clearly a character with a firebrand rhetoric because I saw him exploding and going off on leftists about being nothing more than, well, apparatchiks for the state, which I will admit that had my heart a little bit, but I hate the tribalism of only attacking the left or the right. I think we completely divulge ourselves from what is the most valuable when it comes to criticism and analysis of the political structures when we're only attacking the left or only attacking the right. Okay, let's go ahead and get into those clips. From Being Libertarian, it says Milei in 2020, and here's the deal. I will not be transcribing this. I will not be speaking over what he is saying. There's a certain passion you can hear in someone's voice when they're speaking from the depth of their soul. And I do not want to rob people from being able to hear the passion that comes from someone like this who truly understands that the state at its core is nothing more than a criminal institution and a mafia in the limit. Let's go ahead and throw it into it.
Están pasando cosas graves en el mundo. O sea, a mí me parece...
Lo que pasa con Donald Trump...
Claro. O sea, desde el punto de vista de la geopolítica, lo que pasó en Estados Unidos es tremendo. Digo, al margen, digo, que está claro que los demócratas suelen hacer fraude y esta vez es como que se le pasó un poquito la mano. O sea, eso se lo puedes preguntar a cualquiera que sepa bien de Estados Unidos.
Que esto es fraude.
Sí, claro. Pero, digamos, es gravísimo porque lo peor que te puede pasar es tener un presidente de los Estados Unidos débil, ¿sí? Con inclinaciones socialistas, en un mundo que es un polvorín, en un mundo que por el tema de la pandemia los dictadores están dispuestos a avanzar, a cercenar libertades individuales, y del otro lado está Putin en Rusia, la vocación totalitaria de los chinos y Corea del Norte. O sea, te das cuenta que el mundo, o sea, te diría que casi que la caída de Trump sería poner en peligro a la civilización occidental.
Okay, so Milei believes that the fall of Donald Trump would endanger Western civilization, and these were the comments he was making in 2020. Let's go ahead and move on to this clip, and this hits my soul. This is quite fascinating. And this really shows the momentum that this man has in this country. I wish Donald Trump was half as good on half of the issues as Javier Milei. Let's go ahead.
¿Te vas a dedicar a la política?
Si llegan a estar en peligro seriamente las libertades individuales, como está mostrando día a día este gobierno liberticida, creo que puede que llegue mi momento.
Porque como hemos pedido que se vayan todos y no se fue ninguno, entonces que se queden todos, porque nos vamos a meter todos y los vamos a sacar a patadas en el culo, ¿sí? Para volver a reconstruir la Argentina próspera, una Argentina liberal, una Argentina pujante, una Argentina que vuelva a abrazar los valores de Alberdi y así en 35 años volver a ser la primer potencia mundial. Entonces sí, efectivamente me voy a meter en política.
¿Sabes a quién vas a votar?
Milei, olvidate.
¿A Milei? Sí.
Milei. Milei puede ser.
Milei.
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 Javier Milei.
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 A Milei.
Y Milei me parece.
Milei.
Milei.
Milei. Milei.
¿Querés que te diga en serio?
Sí.
Milei.
Yo no me metí acá para estar guiando corderos. Yo me metí acá para despertar leones.
Cuando yo te voy a una elección y te pido el voto, no es para que me des el poder, es para que te lo pueda devolver.
La libertad avanza.
Know that when I ask for your vote, I do not do so because I desire power. I do so because I desire to return it all back to you. This is the hallmark of what a true leader is, and that is the hallmark of what a true leader inspires. I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. Thank you for watching if you got this far. I really appreciate it. Stay lovely, stay great. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it, a thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below, because I really don't think I'm wrong at all about this. Thank you for watching. Peace out.